Let's learn what squares are. Squaring a number is multiplying the number by itself. For example, squaring the number 5 means multiplying 5 by 5 and the answer is 25. That means the square of number 5 is 25. Or in other words, you can say that 5 squared equals 25. Now you see this little 2 I have written above 5. That 2 indicates that the number appears twice in the multiplication. Now let's see some common squares here. 1 squared equals 1. 2 squared equals 2 multiplied by 2 equals 4. 3 squared equals 9. 4 squared equals 16. 5 5s are 25. 6 6s are 36. 7 7s are 49. 8 8s are 64. 9 9s are 81. And 10 10s are 100. That means 10 squared equals 100. Have you seen the square numbers in your times tables? Yes, if you look at your times tables, you can see all the square numbers in this slanting line, or as they call it, as a diagonal. So you can see that 1, 4, 9, 16, and if you continue like this, you will see 25, 36. All these are square numbers. If you take all these square numbers, the perfect squares, and if you start drawing dots for these numbers, it will be like this. Say the first square is square of number 1, so it is 1. And now the square of number 2, which is 4, and 3 squared equals 9. So what you do is, if you are squaring the number 3, then you should have 3 columns and 3 rows. And if you draw the dots like this, 3 columns and 3 rows, then what you get is a square shape. And you will see that the number of dots, which is 9 here, is the square of number 3. Similarly, the square of number 4 will give you 4 rows and 4 columns, and the total dots will be 16, and 16 is the square of number 4. Similarly, you can see that 5 squared equals 25, you get a square shape, and 6 squared equals 36, again you get a square shape of 36 dots. Now let's go back to these square numbers we have seen. Now let's observe the last digits of these square numbers. For example, I can see that the last digit of 100 is 0, and I can see that the last digit is 1 for 1 and 81, and in 4 and 64 the last digit at units place is 4. In 25 the last digit, the digit at units place is 5, and there is 6 in 16 and 36, and there is 9 in 9 and 49. What you can see that a square number can only end with either 0 or 1 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 9. I have shown here the squares up to number 10, but you can continue to write squares for 11, 12, 13 and so on, and you'll always see that the square numbers always end with one of these digits, 0, 1, 4, 5, 6 or 9. I can use this knowledge to tell if a given number can be a square or not. For example, if you look at this number 127, you see that it ends with 7. That means this number is not a square number. This is definitely not a square number, because a square number never ends with 7. If you look at this number 121, you can say that it may or may not be a square. We'll have to check if it is a square, but there is a possibility that this number can be a square because it ends with 1. Now how to check if it is a square or not, that we'll learn later. For now we just see that this number can be a square. Every number that ends with 1 is not a square. For example, there is 11. 11 is not a square, or 21 is not a square. But 1 is a square and 81 is a square. That means if the number ends with 1, all I can say that it can be a square. I'll have to check. But if the number is like this, 143, it ends with 3. So I can say that it is definitely not a square. Okay, I don't have to check. I'm sure that it is not a square because it ends with 3. For the number 144, it ends with 4. So there is a possibility that this number is a square. I can check and tell if it is really a square number. Now again, let's look at the digits at the units place for these square numbers and learn something more. Let's look at 1 and 81. You can see that the square number ends in 1, and these numbers are squares of 1 and 9. That means if there is any number that ends in 1 or 9, the square of that number will always end in 1. That means if the number is like 1, 11, 21, 31 and so on, or if the number is 9, 19, 29 and so on, then the square of these numbers will always end in 1. Similarly, if the numbers are 2, 12, 22 or 8, 18, 28, then the squares of such numbers always end with 4. The square of 2 is 4, the square of 12 is 144 and so on. If the numbers end with 3 or 7, their squares always end with 9. If the numbers end with 4 and 6, like 16 and 36, then their squares always end with 6. If the number ends with 5, its square also ends with 5. So 5 square equals 25 and 15 square equals 225 and 25 squared equals 625. So the funny thing here is that not only these squares end with 5, they actually end with 25. So if you have a number like 5, 15, 25, 35, the squares of such numbers always end with 25. You can actually try this out. And if your number ends with 0, like in 10, its square also ends with 0, like 100. Actually, it ends not only with 0, but it ends with 0, 0. Whenever you have a number that ends with 0, you will see the square of that number ending with 0, 0. For example, 10 squared equals 100, 20 squared equals 400, and 100 squared equals 10,000. So you can see that the number of zeros actually gets doubled. That means you can see that in 20 there is 1 0, but in 400 there are 2 zeros. In 100 there are 2 zeros, and in 10,000 there are 4 zeros. These are some of the things which would be helpful to you to do mental math or to check if your answer is correct or not. Now so far all the squares that we have seen are the squares of the whole numbers. These squares are called as perfect squares. But what happens in case of a fraction? Suppose you have to square 3 over 4. Now we know the definition is to multiply the number by itself. So let's do the same thing. Multiply 3 over 4 by 3 over 4, and that equals 3 3s are 9 over 4 4s are 16. So the answer is 9 over 16. That means 3 over 4 squared equals 9 over 16. Similarly, 2 over 5, if you want to square, you multiply 2 over 5 by 2 over 5 and you will get 4 over 25. It is actually the square of the numerator over the square of the denominator. What happens if there is a mixed number like this? 3 and 1 over 5. How do you square this? What you can do is you simply convert this to an improper fraction. That means 5 3s are 15 plus 1 equals 16. So it is 16 over 5. And now you can square 16 over 5 like any other fraction. How about decimals? How do you square decimals? Again, use the same definition. Multiply the number by itself. That means 1.3 squared equals 1.3 multiplied by 1.3, and that gives you 1.69. That means 1.3 squared equals 1.69. Here is another example. 3.5 squared equals 3.5 times 3.5, which equals 12.25. Now let's look at this square again. 5 squared equals 25. What happens if instead of 5 there is negative 5 and if you want to square it? Let's use the same definition. Negative 5 multiplied by negative 5. Now you know that negative times a negative gives a positive. That means our answer is going to be negative 5 multiplied by negative 5 equals 25, which is a positive number. Now you can see that you got the same answer here. That's very interesting. So what you understand here is that the square of a negative number is always positive. That means whether you square positive 5 or you square a negative 5, you are going to get the same result. Let's see some more example. Negative 7 squared equals negative 7 times negative 7 equals 49, which is the same as the square of 7. Negative 10 squared equals 100, and this is the same as the square of 10.